So once again, welcome, and I'm very grateful to be here with each of you. Can you hear me okay? If you can't, I'm not used to holding a mic, so if my arm strays and you can't hear me, please do let me know. So today is the first Sunday after Easter, and I'm assuming that last Sunday you had some sort of Easter celebration, yes? And in Unity, we believe that Easter is a celebration of the awakening of the I Am. It's a celebration of recognizing and realizing, truly knowing the truth of the Christ that is within us, that is expresses as us. It's a celebration of awakening to the truth of the divinity that is the true nature of our being, our oneness with God, if you will. So then what happens after we have this big holiday to celebrate this awakening? What do we do with it? Eat chocolate? Well, that's a good thing to do. But what happens? Do we just celebrate this on Easter Sunday and then go about our business? Or does it mean anything in our lives on an ongoing basis? And to me, Easter is a celebration of the deepest, most profound, and probably most important teaching that Unity offers. And Unity's not alone in this teaching, but it is, I believe, Unity's deepest and most profound teaching. So once we celebrate it, the idea is to develop some sort of practice or ongoing awareness of the Christ within me and the Christ within each of you. So let's begin today's talk by each and every one of us right now just taking a moment to close your eyes and once again just realize the truth of the Christ that is the essence of your being, the Christ that you express in each and every moment. And then when you know that with your whole heart, your whole soul, your entire being, gently and easily open your eyes and look around and see the Christ in the faces of the people around you. And notice how that feels to see the people around you as the Christ. Feels a little different. And I think that's the idea that Myrtle and Charles, but especially Myrtle, had for us, that we would live a life where we are aware of the truth of our own Christ nature, and as we see the people around us, we see the Christ. And it's a practice. It's an intentional practice, and it takes some work to keep it there. I was preparing this talk, so it was in the forefront of my mind, and this is Friday, and I had an appointment with someone that I was counseling, and right before that I had a dispute with Missouri Gas and Energy on the phone, which took me right to when I needed to leave to make it on time to the counseling appointment, and I drive through this most beautiful park that's a windy road, 2 lanes, no passing, and I got behind this truck that was carrying behind it 2 big water tanks. So it was going about 10 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone, and I'm there, move it, move it, move it. I behold a Christ in you. I behold a Christ in you. Move it. So it becomes a challenge to allow that to be an integrated part of our lives. Let me share with you something that Myrtle wrote. This is in her book, How to Let God Help You. And it is, if anybody wants to look it up, page 79. These are Myrtle's words. Every person, and let me back up because we do have a new person. Myrtle Fillmore is one of our co-founders of Unity. She and her husband, Charles Fillmore, began the Unity movement at about the turn of the 20th century. And this is one of 2 books that she has. And on page 79, she says, every person, quote, must raise his or her consciousness to the place where he or she is able to see the perfect image and likeness of God in all people. One must not let himself or herself be influenced by the likes and dislikes of human nature. Christ is the real self of each individual. By seeing only the Christ in all people, we not only strengthen our own spiritual consciousness, but help all whom we contact to realize and express their innate divinity. So if she's right, when we develop this practice of seeing the Christ in each other, we strengthen our own sense of knowing our own divinity. We grow spiritually, even as we create the space that supports and helps other people to grow in their awareness of the presence of God. Probably, well, let me have a show of hands. How many people in here have had the experience of someone really seeing them, seeing the truth of how great they are, even if for just a moment? Is that transformative or what? Does that work better than constructive criticism? So this is what Myrtle's talking about. And Myrtle didn't create this concept. It's not hers. She didn't come up with this wonderful idea. There was this man that came before her. His name was Jesus. And he's quoted in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 10 and 11. And he was teaching, as he always does, and he said, "Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing the work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me." And in Unity, we believe that Jesus was our teacher, our way shower, our brother, and that he is teaching us how we are to understand our own nature, our own truth. So his words become ours then, the words of our own heart. And then Jesus didn't even come up with this, because before he spoke these words, there were an older scripture, the Vedas, in the Eastern religions that taught the same thing. I don't have a quote from the Vedas, but there was a teacher, Swami Vivekananda, who was a teacher that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore liked. They would attend his talks, and after the first time they went to one of his talks, they distributed his pamphlets for him. They were so impressed by his teachings. And in a book that he's written, this is Swami Vivekananda, and his teachings are based on the Vedas, the Upanishads. He says, quote, "You and I are part of the cosmic consciousness. of what people call Lord or God or Christ or Buddha or Brahman or Spirit. We are all part of that. There is only one existence, one being, the ever-blessed, the omnipresent, the omniscient God that is the soul of your soul. No, it is more than that. Know that you are He. You are one with the God of the universe. So this is a truth of the ages, truly. Many thousands of years, spiritual seekers, wisdom teachers, have been teaching us that we are one with the God of our being. And our spiritual path is knowing that, living that, and seeing that for each other. Which leads me to this bird. Some of you might be wondering why there's a portrait of a bird at the altar. This particular teaching is one that was near and dear to my heart before I had the words for it, before I found unity. But I remember very, very clearly the moment when I first knew it with my heart, my soul, my entire being, and I knew that the purpose of my life was to learn it, to realize it, to live it, and support other people in knowing it as well. And that, have you ever had one of those moments that you'll always remember because it was a moment of insight for you? That's what it was for me. And my bird, her name was Kona, gifted me with that moment. So I want to share that story with you. What I have up here is not the original portrait, it's a photograph of the portrait, just because I didn't want to harm it by carting it around. The portrait was painted by my son. My son was in graduate school for speech pathology. He was on scholarship at a very prestigious school, finishing the program. And one day, guided, led by divine wisdom, he withdrew from school. He gave back the scholarship. Then he called me to let me know he was pursuing art instead. There was a long time that I did not behold the Christ in him. He took an art class, it was Art 101, and his first acrylic painting was the original of this. And to back up a little bit more, let me tell you about Kona, who is the subject of the painting. Kona is a macaw. Macaws, when you include their tail feathers, are about that big. The bird itself is about this big. And they talk. I don't know how many of you are familiar with macaws and talking birds, but when I got Kona, I knew nothing about birds, let alone large parrots and the kind that talk. I had had rabbits and guinea pigs and dogs and cats and turtles and even a horse, but never an animal that talked to me. I thought that basically these birds just said what you trained them to say, that they parroted what they were taught. So I was training her to talk when she was getting to the age where she was able to speak. And one of the first things that she learned was a ritual when I was putting her into her cage at night. And I would carry her on my arm, and in the other hand have a handful of peanuts. That was her favorite food. And I would do it this way because she hated going to bed at night. And unless the peanuts were involved, she usually put up a fuss. But this way, it became a ritual. I carried her to her cage, and she was excited the entire way, saying, "Peanuts, peanuts, want peanuts." and I'd put her in her cage, put the peanuts in her bowl, and she'd run over to eat the peanuts. I'd cover the cage, and we had a very peaceful nightfall. So one day, I'm carrying her on my arm. I have the peanuts in the other hand, and instead of excited, she is sitting like a dead weight, literally. She was heavier, and she looked the complete picture of depression. And I'm saying, Kona, you want your peanuts? No response. Kona, do you want your peanuts? Again, heads down, no response. I got her to the cage. I literally had to peel her off my arm, put her on her perch, and I said, Kona, and I put the peanuts in her bowl, and she didn't move. I said, Kona, don't you want your peanuts? She looked up very slowly, looked me in the eye, and said, want kiss. I took her out of the cage. She nuzzled on my shoulder, gave me a couple bird equivalents of a kiss on my cheek, and then looked up and said, want peanuts? And I put her back in her cage. She ate her peanuts. So then I began to learn that she was actually able to use the speech to communicate. And I took this time to tell you about her because you needed to know a little bit about who she was to understand that moment, that aha moment that happened for me. Okay, so we're back to my son taking Art 101. He paints his first acrylic painting, which is this, but I don't know it yet. I'm in my living room. I've received a package that's wrapped. Kona is behind me on a perch right here, but I can see her through my peripheral vision. And I'm standing there unwrapping this gift. I unwrap the package, and I have to set down the mic just a moment. Kona sees this picture, and she does this, oh, wow! Hello, Kona! And she kept her wings spread, and she was just so joyous. She kept her attention on this painting. I could feel that through my whole body, that moment, because I knew that had it been a portrait of me, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And I knew that I wanted so badly to be able to see myself and in sheer joy be able to say, oh, wow, hello, Dalia. Oh, how I wanted to be able to do that. But I had too many negative messages, too many statements of not good enough, too many statements of what would people think, too many statements, too much baggage. This bird could see herself and just joyously say, oh, wow. Later on, when I learned the languaging, I could add that if I really saw the Christ in me, wouldn't I say, oh, wow? And when I asked each of you to look around and see the Christ in each other, had you really, really seen the Christ? Wouldn't the whole room have been saying, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. Wouldn't we? I mean, we really saw. So I challenge each person in here to someday, somehow, capture a bit of what Kona had in that moment. I behold the Christ in you. Oh, wow. I see the divine shining in your eyes. Oh, wow. So what stops us? What keeps us from doing that? One, it's a race consciousness. So part of it is just intention and practice. But there's another stumbling block that really gets in the way here. our fear can really keep us from seeing the Christ in ourselves and in each other. When I was behind that man with the water tanks, it wasn't a huge fear, but it was a little fear. I might be late, and then how would I look, and what would people think, and what kind of person is late for an appointment, you know. Fear of not being good enough in that moment. And again, it wasn't a big moment. I kept bringing myself back. There's a story that I really like, and it's a story of a boy. He was a Buddhist. He was about 13, maybe 14 years old. He was every mother's dream. I mean, this child didn't really act out. His room wasn't too much of a disaster. He actually liked school. He was an honor student. He had goals he wanted to go on, and he had career plans and college plans. He had the type of friends who were respectful when they came in the house and said hello to his parents. And I mean, there were kids, but this boy was really every mother's dream. And then one day, this young Buddhist boy was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I don't know how much people know about type 1 diabetes, but in our race consciousness, in the consciousness of our Western medical science, it is an incurable disease. And in a lot of ways, it's a life sentence to restrictions and precautions and always the danger of medical emergencies coming up. And this boy changed almost overnight. He became sullen, uncooperative, disrespectful. He stopped doing his homework. He refused to take his medication unless pretty much overseen and forced. He wasn't cooperating with that. And he definitely wasn't cooperating with the diet that was prescribed to him. I mean, he did when a parent was around, but when he was on his own, he did whatever he felt like with food. So they took him to a therapist, and the therapist was a doctor named Dr. Naomi Raymond. She's a psychiatrist, a therapist. She's also a spiritual teacher, and it's from her that I heard this story. And she met with this boy time after time after time. And knowing a little bit of who she is and the way she teaches, my guess is a big part of her work with him was simply sitting with him and seeing, well, I guess in his case, the Buddha with him. But there seemed to be no improvement. She couldn't get him to open up. His parents would meet with her, very distraught, losing hope. And then one week, before he came in, she gets a call from his parents saying, "You did a great job. We don't know what you did, but thank you, thank you, thank you. He's doing great. He's on his medication. He's watching his diet. Whatever you did, thank you so much." Naomi Raymond is wondering what happened here, because she had no idea. So he comes into his session, he sits down, and she goes, "Okay, cough it up. What happened? Tell me, let me in on your secret." And so this boy shared with her, he goes, "I had a dream. Because I don't know where this came from, but I had a dream. And in the dream I was walking, and as I was walking along, I came upon the Buddha. But this Buddha was different from any other Buddha I had seen. He wasn't old, he wasn't fat, he wasn't like the older people around. He was just like me. He was a young Buddha. And he was sitting, and he looked so strong and so peaceful. All I wanted to do was come sit by his feet, knowing that if I could sit by this Buddha, if I could be in this energy of this Buddha, that I would be okay, and the diabetes couldn't hurt me." So I was just about ready to sit down by the Buddha when I hear behind me this whoosh, And I turn around and I see this huge dagger, and it pierced the Buddha's heart. And I was so angry. I was determined to find who had hurt the Buddha and hurt them too, make them stop. And I ran and I looked and I couldn't find the source of the threat. And I felt so sad because I couldn't stop this threat from hurting the Buddha anymore. But I was so busy looking for this thing that had hurt him, I forgot. I forgot to keep my attention on the Buddha. And while I was looking away, this young Buddha had grown larger and larger and larger and larger. And when I looked, I had to look way up to see his face. And he was so large that this dagger was like a tiny toothpick that barely scratched his skin. And I knew in that moment that I was that Buddha and that Buddha was me and that I was bigger than this diabetes and that I didn't have to be afraid. So the fear takes our attention away from the truth of our being. The fear takes our attention away from the truth of our Christ nature or Buddha nature. But when we return to knowing the truth of who we are, we come to realize that the power of God that lives in us is greater than any challenge. It is greater than any diagnosis. It is greater than any supposed obstacle. It doesn't mean we don't have work to do. It doesn't mean we don't have steps to take to meet the challenges. But when we return our gaze within and know the truth of who we are, we know that the power of God that lives within us, that Christ of our being, is greater than anything that seems to be our obstacle. So the more we remember this, the stronger it becomes in us. And there is one tool that Unity teaches that really helps us stay centered in this. Anybody have any idea what this tool is? What shifts our consciousness to the truth of who we are? Affirmations. Prayer. Affirmations are a form of prayer. Silent prayer. Affirmative prayer. Sometimes reading spiritual literature can be a form of prayer that reminds us. Find the form of prayer that works for you and let it be your best friend. Call Silent Unity, if you will. I kind of like that organization. Now I need your help because I haven't talked here before. How am I doing with time? Is it time to stop? Yes. This is a good stopping place then. So, the truth of who we are awakens at Easter, and the idea is to live this truth the entirety of the rest of the year. To find a practice that raises our consciousness, to help us remember that we are greater than our fears. God bless you. Namaste.